pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. O'Day, may we please have roll call?
Mr. Abdullah?
Here.
Mr. Azar?
Here.
Mrs. Henderson?
Here.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Here.
Mrs. Karam?
Here.
Mr. Moran?
Here.
Mr. Robeson?
Here.
Mrs. Tierney?
Here.
Mr. Acker?
Here.
All present.
We're going to do a slight pivot here. I'm going to ask the board for a motion to approve the agenda, although it's not on the agenda itself, but we need to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Abdullah?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Thank you very much. Can we please have a motion to approve the minutes from the meetings of November 20th, December 4th, and January 8th?
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdullah?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Okay, can we please have any board reports? Mrs. Karam?
Okay, it's a bit of a longer one. The Finance Committee held a meeting on December 4th, 2024. Mr. Mirabelli presented on the expenditures of the board-approved $1 million loan, which covered a list of approximately 50 projects. He then reviewed the board-approved $10 million loan, of which approximately $6.8 million has been expended and committed, mainly in the middle school planning stages and elementary renovations, as well as the high school field project. Projects and expenses have aligned with our predicted budgets. Mr. Mirabelli then reported to the committee the preliminary data on the 23-24 fiscal results from the audit. In sum, a major headwind for us will be rising healthcare costs that will have a major impact on our operating budget, and you'll be hearing more about that probably tonight. Our main agenda topic, though, for the meeting was the middle school project. We had a lengthy discussion with our financial team, including David Payne, representing PNC Bank, and Zach Williard, representing PFM. We reviewed the several bond financing scenarios presented by the team with the project draw schedule, as well as the projections on the impact of the operating budget. The committee addressed concerns with market conditions, our borrowing timing, our amount parameters, i.e. what is the maximum financing amount, and the effect of arbitrage. Due to these discussions about market conditions and timing, as well as excellent questions brought up by the committee on comparable data from other districts, investment and interest offsets, and potential opportunities to adjust the timing and amount of the debt structure to offset risk, we asked the financial team to prepare several more scenarios for the committee. The Finance Committee then met again last night, Tuesday, January 21st, with Mr. Payne and Mr. Williard to review the scenarios requested by the Finance Committee. The scenarios we requested further took into account capitalized interest and capital reserve funds. We discussed our risk tolerances per the budget, the project, the market or interest rates, legal, as well as risks related to the debt structure in the very near future. And here I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude and appreciation for the school board and the opportunity to chair a committee with such a wealth of financial knowledge. I have served on the curriculum committee where I've seen firsthand how Mrs. Henderson's background in education has made a significant impact. And likewise, as a member of the tech committee, Mr. Robeson's leadership has brought us into the 21st century. I cannot express enough that the effort, energy, and dedication of both Mr. Acker and Mr. Azar on this committee with me has been vital to optimizing and problem solving the financing for this important and necessary middle school project. I should add here that I'm especially thankful for our financial advisors, administration team, and Dr. Schaefer's leadership in particular throughout my tenure on this board, and I am excited to see how much we accomplish in 2025. Lastly, on that note, I am also chair of the Community Outreach Committee, and while I do not have a formal board report to make tonight, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the impressive newsletter that was mailed to the entire district over the holiday break. Much of the feedback I have received can be expressed in a simple phrase: Comet proud. Thank you, Mr. Acker.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the kind words. Are there any other board reports? Mr. Azar.
Mr. Acker. It's a little bit older news because we had a board meeting since then and we talked about a lot of this, but back on January 2nd, we did have a facilities committee meeting. We talked about a few things, the two that I'll mention tonight. Obviously, the middle school construction manager contract that we voted on at the last board meeting. We reviewed the proposals in detail, the RFP process. We discussed it with some of the committee members that weren't able to participate in those interviews, and we arrived at a recommendation that we voted on last week, so we're happy to be moving forward with ICS. The other topic, and this is an ongoing topic still, but the latest stadium bleacher designs were reviewed by the committee and approved. The stadium that's underway at the high school with the new turf field is getting close to completion, except for the weather outside, giving us a little bit of a delay. The other topic related to the bleachers that Dr. Schaefer brought up, which we've talked about before, is that once that project is complete, he shared with the committee his strong view that we eventually close the back of the school to traffic, normal traffic, still make it accessible for emergency traffic, but to try to make that a much safer environment behind the school. So a lot of discussions would still have to take place of how to make that happen, but we spent a good amount of time discussing that in the committee as well. So that's it. That's all I'll mention for now.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other reports? Okay. Now's the time for the best part of the meeting, the student representative reports. Owen and Gia, the floor is yours. Thankfully, we're going to have the best part first, right, Owen?
Good evening. So this month has been pretty light after coming off of the break, but without further ado, here are my reports. Keystone makeups were given to satisfy Act 158 during the first 2 weeks of January. The second marking period is scheduled to end on January 29th, and students are preparing for midterms and semester finals, which start tentatively on January 27th. For our co-curricular activities, spring musical auditions were held on January 12th, and the musical chosen was The Sound of Music. The cast list has been shared out, and rehearsals are underway. Students will be prepared to perform on the weekend of April 10th through the 13th. The 2025 semi-formal dance has been scheduled for Saturday, February 15th from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Scranton Cultural Center. Tickets will be on sale January 29th through the 31st, and the theme of the dance is Northern Lights. FBLA has recently competed at the regional level with over 30 members individually qualifying for the state competition that will be held this April in Hershey. Huge congratulations to those students. And lastly, for our parent report cards for the second quarter marking period will be sent home on February 10th. Those are all my updates for this evening.
Thank you.
And now for your worst part of the board meeting, the athletic team notes. So our team spent the last week supporting the PIAA initiative of the Officials Appreciation Week for winter sports. Our teams greeted all of our home event officials with a goodie bag and a photo with the captains and coaches from both teams prior to the start of each contest. The PIAA is recruiting new officials, and we encourage anyone interested in learning more about that opportunity to contact our athletic department for more information. The Comets Leadership Council hosted a nutrition and hydration seminar on Thursday, January 16th for high school athletes. They focused on nutrition guidelines for pre- and post-game preparations, calorie and protein intake, along with proper hydration, and many other things required to reach peak performance. There was a Q&A at the end for student athletes and coaches to gain insights into their specific sports and interests. The Spring Sport Physical Date, sponsored by our partners at the Lehigh Valley Health Network, will take place on Saturday, February 22nd, in the high school's nurses suite. Spring Sports will officially begin on Monday, March 3rd. All spring sports information, including online physical registration links, can be found on the athletics website. Our boys basketball team. This year, the Comets have battled their way to a 500 overall record. In the league play, they have stayed on the positive side, losing to Scranton, Scranton Prep, but beating out Valley View, North Pocono, Delaware Valley, and West Scranton. To finish out the season, they will play the rest of their league matchups, looking to sweep Del Val, North Pocono, West Scranton, and Valley View, along with trying to split the 2-game series with Scranton and Scranton Prep. On Sunday, February 2nd, the teams travel to Parkland High School to face Pocono Mountain West in a Hoop Group Showcase tournament. Senior forward Robbie Lucas is the team's leader in points per game, averaging just over 20. He is nearing the 1,000-point club as he aims to take the team back to another District 2 championship this year. Our girls basketball, with the Lady Comets also having a 500 overall record and improved to 3-3 in league play after last night's victory over West Scranton. So far this season, senior Maggie Coleman has had several honors, being named to the all-tournament team at the State College Tip-Off Tournament after hitting 9 threes in one game, scoring 27 points to help the girls go 1-1 in the tournament. This was also a school record for our girls team. Coleman is just 15 points shy of joining the 1,000-point club, and it could happen as soon as tomorrow night at Wallenpaupack. Maggie and the team look to advance to the Mohegan Sun Arena for their 10th straight trip to the 5A District Championship game. With our wrestling, the Comets are off to a hard-fought start to the season, battling through some tough matches this year. The Comets split their two home matches, beating West Scranton 34-28 on Wednesday, January 8th, thanks to pins from Brian Hurd and Frank Scalpi. On senior night, the team fell to the league opponent Wallenpaupack 39-24, in spite of earning technical falls from Mason Whitney, Brian Hurd. Senior Brian Hurd has been enjoying a great individual season. He was announced the Times Tribune Athlete of the Week for December 22nd through 28th. And to finish off the season, the team travels to Delaware Valley tonight in their league final matchup. And on the 24th and 25th, they will be at the Coal Cracker Tournament at Lehighton High School, looking to add to their season resume before heading into the team district duels on Wednesday, January 29th. With our boys and girls swim and dive team, both teams have been seemingly unstoppable in competition this year, with the boys being undefeated with 9-0, and the girls losing their first meet yesterday to Elk Lake by only 8 points, with a final score of 89-97. The team has competed in several multi-team meets this year, including the Gold Classic relays, where overall the team placed second and the girls placed first. With our boys and girls indoor track, DJ Rogers ran a season-best time of 23:64 in the 200-meter dash at the Riverhawk Invitational at Susquehanna University on Sunday, January 12th. He also finished 8th in the high jump with a jump of 5 foot and 8 inches. Tamara Seed had a busy meet, finishing 3rd in the pole vault, 4th in the triple jump, and 6th in the long jump. Reese Morgan finished 5th in the mile with a time of 5 minutes and 52 seconds. Reese also finished 6th in the 800 with a time of 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Julia Schuster finished 5th in the 60-meter hurdles with a PR of 10 seconds, or 10.27 seconds. And lastly, our unified bocce team. They beat Lakeland last week after winning the Golden Frame. They have three home matches coming up, beginning on Tuesday, January 28th, which will be their senior night. They'll host Lackawanna Trail on Thursday, the 30th, and then we'll host Wallenpaupack on Tuesday, February 4th, which will be our Jam the Gym event. And the match will start at 3:30, so the students can stay after school to attend. We also asked that all coaches encourage their teams to jam the gym and get their players there in support of our unified bocce team. That's it for tonight. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful report, Owen. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, Dr. Schaefer, you're on.
I will soon yield my time to Mr. Mirabelli, who will provide a presentation, but I just wanted to make a gratuitous plug for this Friday's Clark Summit Festival of Ice Parade, starting at 6:30. Dr. Tioni will be there leading the way, as well as our high school marching band, dance team, swim and dive team, and cheer team. So come on out to the Ice Festival Parade. It's a great time. As I said, that Dr. Tioni will be out front. She's got like an ice bell that she'll be ringing there. It'll be absolutely fantastic to see.
It's a crown?
It's a crown.
So is the crown for
it's
Mr.
a
Abdullah
tiara.
or for Dr. Schaefer?
think we'll also have the brand-new F-350, white with the decal there. Dr. Tioni will be driving that. You all ready, Jim?
Oh, yes.
All right.
We had an electronic copy of the budget in your folders, but in case you prefer paper, I provided some for you there. Tonight, we have on the agenda a preliminary budget, and some may be asking, or maybe not asking, why are we voting on a budget so early? We usually talk about preliminary budget in March and April, and then vote on it in May. But, it doesn't work. So, what we have this year is a unique circumstance where we want to give ourselves a little additional flexibility. And there are two options at this point in time, and I think the board's very well familiar with the first option. You would pass a resolution to stay within the Act 1 index. The other option is to pass an early budget. And an early budget done here in January provides you some more flexibility. It also provides you an advanced copy of the budget so that we have more time to review it, make changes, refine it. Although we'll be working in the background in the business office and having internal discussions on the budget, this is making the budget publicly available much, much earlier than usual. So a lot of additional time to review and have discussions there. Specifically, this provides the district ability to apply for referendum exceptions. Because of the increased costs of special education in the district, and I put this slide up here just so folks who wanted to look at this afterward can kind of look through the calculation. But our costs, as calculated specifically by PDE from the year 22-23 to 23-24 on an audited basis, increased by $625,000, okay? So that is on the right-hand side in the middle, that kind of variance there. You can see our special ed costs went up from 23 to 24. And then PDE takes you through this elimination calculation, and then they tell you what is the estimated amount that if you're approved, if the board wanted to pursue a referendum exception on special ed costs, you would have about $224,000 above the 4.7% index that would be available to you should you choose to do it. And given the circumstances on increased costs and possible capital and debt needs coming up, we would recommend that you leave this option on the table. Your decision tonight does not have any bearing on taxes right now. The decision comes in June, what you will do ultimately on taxes. So this is no different than passing a preliminary budget in May. You're not making any decision on that. This is a formality. It's an opportunity to take the first look at a budget and make this budget available publicly, and then we'll begin on the fine tuning. There is a lot of data we don't know yet, right? For example, the governor has not even put his budget forth for the state of Pennsylvania yet. So we really don't have anything. But just to tell you what some of the assumptions we made in the document that's before you, we have in there, because this is the way that you have to present it to the state if you're going to pursue referendum exceptions. There is the 4.7% tax increase plus the referendum exception in the document before you. I believe if you look on page 6 of that document, line 4U, you'll see that $224,361 tax revenue in excess of index, right? Just so we can all see that number is there from the referendum exception. So that's where you will see that number. Again, approving this does not tie your hands to any particular tax rate. It does leave you open the flexibility and the ability to go to the state and apply for that referendum exception. The referendum exception then needs to be advertised. We'll talk about the timeline. But the state would then have to come back and say, yes, you may pursue that. And then but there is a very strict timeline that we have to follow, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other assumptions we made, and you know, we already alluded to it too, on a budget-to-budget basis from 24-25 to 25-26, overall increase in health insurances on a budget basis is about $1.45 million, right? We had seen a catastrophic year in 23-24 in terms of health insurance claims. And we were hoping that's kind of an anomaly, a spike. We're kind of seeing the same trend continue 6 months into this year. Just received some data yesterday that would support that perhaps we would be looking at a similar number, seeing this trend continue. So that represents, you know, a level funding we think to break even going forward in that health insurance fund. Again, an estimate, we are going to closely monitor the claims. I have a meeting with our advisors, medical insurance advisors, coming up. It is something that we are going to meet pretty often on and keep an eye on, just so we can get some more up-to-date information, and I will pass that information along to the board. Contractual salary increases we have in there at 3%. This will get more accurate after we know, you know, who's retiring, who's moving columns, which new teachers are coming in as we get closer to June. That will get refined. I suspect if we don't add any positions, that number may get a little better because that natural attrition of turnover usually brings you in lower than the 3%, okay? Transportation increase, we have it at 3%. The state has not yet published the cost index for next year, so we don't really have an idea what it will be. Could be less than 3, could be more than 3, but our contracts are currently tied to that index. So we're waiting on that, and that's a big number. That's a big part of our cost structure. Cleaning services, it's been going up at a rate historically around 3%. You know, so we have that budgeted in there. And then estimated new debt service, we had to get a placeholder in there just to represent something. As excuse me, as Mrs. Karam said, we have looked at 30 different scenarios and we're looking at more, right? So we are really looking hard at all these to come up with the best possible solution. This is debt service as a placeholder. That does not mean like this number can go up, this number can go down. We had to get an estimate in there, so that's currently transparently what is in the budget. Okay, budgetary reserve, $300,000, and then inflationary increases on special ed and electricity utilities. Specific to electricity, I think it's PJM. The governing body of the utilities passed some pretty landmark increases, which is going to increase our cost district-wide between $5,000 and $6,000. That's a fixed cost we can't do anything about. We can't bid that out. So this is a cost that even if we did or didn't bid out our electricity, we couldn't avoid. They're passing that directly on us through the infrastructure portion of our bill. Any question on those assumptions that are coming? Yes.
So the 1.45 million that is now in the budget, I just want to be clear, that's an incremental increase over roughly what we talked about a year ago. Is that accurate? Like,
so if you took the budget that we passed last year,
right,
which was, you know, obviously lower than we needed to have,
right,
right, versus the number budgeted here, that's the difference.
That's the difference, 1.45.
Like there's a lot of different numbers flying, because in the forecast, we talked about 800, but in the
Right.
forecast, we were already projecting a healthy portion of this. We just didn't expect it to be that.
To be this much.
Right.
Year to year, what's the increase you're looking at there? What's the percentage increase for that number?
On
More or
a
less.
5.4 million, you're about 20%.
20% increase.
That's very rough off the top of my head.
That's the number.
Yeah, okay, about 20%.
I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I think that, you know, to get the board sort of up to speed on some of the discussions that we're having about the debt that we're going to eventually have to issue for the middle school, could you talk about what we learned last night from our advisors who talked to our bond counsel about the fact that, and that's just an estimate so far, but the interest expense on the newly issued debt, you know, we'll just talk about how that's going to appear on our operating budget, but the benefits that we've all been talking about in terms of interest income is not. going to be in our budgets?
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, so we want to be careful about how we talk about debt. So, in essence, let's say you took out a construction loan on a new house, right? You would immediately have your mortgage payment to pay because you drew 100, let's say you drew 100% of the loan out. But you would have money in the bank because you wouldn't be paying your contractors yet, right? So in that scenario, at home, you'd be able to keep whatever interest you had and do whatever you want. Go on vacation, pay the light bill, or pay more toward the project. Here, we don't have that opportunity, okay? The money we borrow, we're going to invest immediately in the best possible investment we can find that matches up to what we call the draw schedule, right? The amounts we have to pay out. Now, the money that we earn there goes into this bond, construction account and must stay there, okay? And it can't be used to come back, in our scenario, to pay the light bill, not that we're going on vacation, but it's a poor example, but to pay the light bill, to pay salaries, things like that. So we need to keep in mind that any interest earned there doesn't come back to the operation. It stays over for projects, for purposes of either using toward another project or borrowing less on this project. And we did confirm that, because that was an open point last night. We did confirm that our advisors were correct there, and I could pass along the email that we just received before coming up here in this meeting, directly from the lawyer to the committee. Does that satisfy?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like, we're not, you mentioned a couple of other examples, but we can't use the interest income that's, as long as interest rates stay where they're at or around that, we're not gonna be able to use any of the interest income earned on what you invest that capital into to pay that interest expense on the actual debt service that we issue. So like, we're gonna be encumbering, if you look at the whole capital structure of the school district, it includes the operating budget and these reserves that we have. But we're not gonna see the benefit, we've had a benefit the last couple of years of investing our surplus capital because interest rates went up significantly. It used to be we made no money on our deposits. We've made a lot recently. But all the money that we raised, even though we're not spending it right away, all the interest income is not gonna show up in our budget, just the expense. No matter how much, whatever dollar amount we decide to raise and what timing. So yeah, that was the only point I wanted to start to discuss.
It'll certainly be working for us, but only on projects.
We'll have to raise a little bit less debt, basically,
Right.
because the debt that we raise is gonna earn interest, but it's not gonna show up in our budget,
Correct.
our operating budget.
A question on the tax increase of the 4.7 index with the additional, the educational additional of the 224. Will the index increase, the percentage increase for the year? And then will that mean the millage will increase?
I want to make sure I understand your question.
So at 4.7, what will that index, what will our index be? as a
5.2.
percentage?
It's approximately 5.2. If you look on the one page, it's maybe 5.2 and change.
So how will our millage increase then with that increase of the 224? Will our millage number increase?
Yes, so a mill is worth approximately $220,000, just by sheer coincidence. It would be one additional mill on top of those mills that you raised.
So will then that be the,
Do you take, let's say we take the current millage, 130 something, point something, 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 multiplied by .052 would give you the additional millage on top of that? I haven't done this in a minute, so.
Yeah, it's all,
Is that about right?
so, right here on page 5, you can see that the prior year millage is 141.4467. The millage would go to 149.09. So you're in the ballpark of just under 8 mills.
so then the next year's budget, when we get the index, our millage will be at that 149?
Well, I mean, your millage will be at whatever you set it in June.
In June?
And then whatever you do next year is a separate consideration on top of whatever you do in June. Am I,
Yep.
okay,
All right, thank you.
okay. Any other questions on what's in the budget? I didn't spend a lot of time on revenue because we don't have a ton of data from the state on revenue. And I did talk about our biggest revenue, real estate taxes. Here's a slide just to look year over year. Salaries are, that's that 3% increase in the budget there, $792,000. Employee benefits, 1.8, mostly that is driven by the health insurance, right? The rest is the pension and FICA attributable to the salary increases up top. Purchase professional services minor, you see some minor inflationary adjustments there. But then at the bottom, the increase of $917,000 for budgetary reserve, but largely debt service there. That's where you see the debt service. Actually, that's all debt service. That is the debt service that you saw on the previous page of 785 plus the additional from the 2024 bond issue coming on. So that one's now, at peak debt load. So that's what that difference is there. So just so you can quantify some of the major differences in the budget. And again, we're going to work on refining these estimates as we go. So plenty of bad news to find, but here's a little good news I got today. I've been hounding our friends down at the county assessment office to give us our our real estate assessed values for some time. They used to come out, December-ish, even November, but yeah, now they're, making some changes, I guess. So we did have an update today, just before the meeting. I received it. Growth of 0.87% taxable assessed value. Now, 0.87 sounds like a small percentage, but some will remember when we're talking about a forecast, I have 0.45, which is the average historical increase. So this is positive. Now, this is a preliminary number. They say this is, the cutoff, but they say it's preliminary. They're going to finalize it. But I think that's a positive indicator that we've almost doubled the rate of 0.45 that we've assumed in our forecast. So at least that resets the bar on an assessed value basis. Millage, the impact of millage appreciation, which is not included in that revenue number, is $289,000, right? So that helps the deficit if this number were to come to fruition. Because our natural property values, some folks have built some homes in the area, I assume that's what's largely driving it. We will have, without a tax increase, the $289,000. Any questions on that? Okay. Act 1 timeline, I started to allude to this, but I just want to make it, clear because this is just a little different process than we've done in the past. So with approval of the budget tonight, we will tomorrow start the Friday, if we put an ad in the paper on Friday, we will start the 10-day public notice period. After 10 days, I will be able to generate the application for the referendum exceptions, and then we'll have to print, Chris will have to sign off on it, and we'll send that in. And then after we apply for the exceptions, PD may give us some feedback, ask for additional information or changes. Essentially, we have to demonstrate the need and the accuracy of the calculation. The numbers are right off the AFR reports, so there's not a lot that can go wrong there, in my opinion. So we're demonstrating the need for our budget, and then the deadline for them to rule is early February. So we would know the first or second week of February. And then from there, it's just a traditional budget process. We'll have presentations, and we'll continue to talk about different headwinds and tailwinds, and we'll bring to you some data and analytics, but we won't vote again until June. And those are the notes I had. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
In order to qualify for an exception, especially with special ed, what constitutes that? How do we qualify?
So we qualify by virtue of the calculation. Again, I realize this is a terrible thing to put on a slide, but this is literally what will get sent into PDE. This calculation that they designed tells you what your increased cost in special ed is as they define it. So we go through the calculation, and it tells you at the bottom, the calculation drives out that $224,000 number based on what additional monies they provided and how much expense you've incurred. As you can see, there's quite a gap between the additional expense we incurred and the amount they allow you. So you're always falling behind regardless. But even though your cost went up by $625, your reimbursements didn't go up.
Do you have any information of other school districts in our enrollment and our socioeconomics, and what percentage of their special education has this increase? And are there, most school districts now are applying for this exception?
Are they applying for these? So I know, like, every superintendent, and we've talked to plenty of superintendents, special ed is like top of the list. Like, that's what they're talking about. They're trying to figure out a way to control that cost, to control charter school costs, but special ed is just, I don't talk to another business manager that isn't concerned about special education costs, because I think Chris provided some data last meeting, and it's just very challenging to control those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mirabelli, thank you very much.
I just want to ask this quick question on the special education calc that you just put out there. I know it's a big page, but when a student goes to cyber and we have to pay for it, if they're a special education, if they qualify as a special education student when they get tested, we pay more. Is that correct?
We pay a lot more.
Right. So is that incremental cost captured in our special education costs? Or is that like a separate line item?
It is, and just specifically, again, I knew nobody was going to be able to read it, but we call that the 1200 function is special education, right? And we do code that cost to the 1200s. So it is in our top line of 7.8 million, and there is no exclusion for it. So yes, it is captured in
So
that.
if I'm also not mistaken, if a student opts to go to charter school and we have them as a regular education student, the charter school may decide to assess them and on their own determine that they're a special ed student. We have no control over how they assess those students.
That's correct.
Yes, that's absolutely.
Senator Acker, that's correct.
And it-
Senator
and
Acker,
it-
that's correct.
And it, so just, because this is an important point, and while it doesn't solve the problem today, it certainly is a point that I drive home in advocacy with our local representatives. We receive special education funding based on 3 categories, and I think that those are commensurate with the level of the disability and cost, if you will. We have a large percentage of our students that may receive some itinerant support services. So for instance, as you could imagine, like speech therapy or hearing support would be less expensive as compared to autistic support. And I'm just giving this as an example and not comparing either or. When a student goes to a cyber charter school, there is no categorical funding. So student attends a cyber charter school and is receiving itinerant hearing support, probably that may cost us maybe $1,500 a year. We would pay we would pay right now $23,000 as compared to a regular education student at $11,000, right? So these are the types of things that I advocate for, and this is why We see many charter schools with large funds because they operate in a different system. And this really does speak to the driving up of these prices in the disproportionality. And I've talked about the disproportionality before, but I'll mention it again, that our costs associated with special education have risen over, I think, that 5 to 7 year area, of around 30%, while our subsidy has grown over that same time at 13%. And I also talked last week, if you took a look at, kind of like a dollar of revenue for each kid, well, 70 cents of that dollar is from your local taxpayers. 29 cents from the state and 1% federal. So as you can imagine, as those costs increase and we don't get that subsidy, then that can really only come from one spot, and that's us. And Jim put this up, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. This is like a characterization, but the higher your Act 1 index, the less likely you are to qualify because it's so high. If you took a look at that chart that he had up there, the 4.7, which is our base Act 1 index, was already in there, and we were sky high over it, right? That's usually a high marker, which is why during the last maybe 4 years, when the Act 1 index has been at historical highs, that we did not qualify, only in 1 year, because it was so high. So that's a marker. When you know that you qualify by what the equivalent of 2%, you know that that number is big, and 625,000 is certainly a really big number. That's 6 teachers.
Approximately how many students are in that special ed charter school program from our
I'll have to
district?
say, we're usually hovering around 25,
I think,
75-25 split.
Yeah, I was gonna say 30, but I haven't looked at the bills in the last month, but that's a fair estimate.
It's a bit of a decrease, right?
We
we're
did
slowly
decrease, it
bringing
went up
down?
a little bit, but we're just usually hovering around 100. But what stayed the same has been the special education. It's just like it just works out. It's like a 2-to-1 proposition for us. I mean, it's like 11,000.
Okay, next part of our meeting is public comment. If anyone would like to address the board, please let Mrs. O'Day know. I think, Mr. McLean, I think you're the public person in.
So we won't call Mr. McLean. There we go.
Okay. In that particular case, let's move on to the treasurer's report and go through that and hopefully approve the treasurer's budget as presented.
Okay. So I have 2 reports. The treasurer's report for November 2024. We began the month with a cash balance of $33,087,430.50. We took in $3,984,579.33 in monthly revenues. Our net disbursements were $4,622,002.77 for a cash balance of $32,450,000 and $7.06. And now for December, we began the month with the cash balance that I just mentioned. We took in $4,239,401.15 in monthly revenues. Our net disbursements were $4,591,678.22 for a cash balance of $32,097,729.99.
Thank you very much. May I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Henderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hillebrand?
Yes.
Mrs. Karam?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Robeson?
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney?
Yes.
Mr. Abdella?
Yes.
Mr. Azar?
Yes.
Mr. Acker?
Yes.
9-0.
Does Dr. Schaefer, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Mr. Acker, ask the board consider a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
So moved.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Hildebrand,
Yes.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Acker, ask the board consider a motion to approve the January 2025 volunteer list.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion?
Just an FYI, I think there's it appears that there's a couple dupes in that list. It's the same name for the same event, and there's like 2 or 3 of them. So just an FYI. Doesn't impact my vote, it just, it seems like there's some dupes unless it's another family member, but it's the same event.
I'll check on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robeson. Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Karam,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Acker, ask the board consider a motion to approve the agreement between NEIU 19 and the Abington Heights School District for partial hospitalization therapeutic services for the 24-25 school year.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand. Mrs. Karam.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Acker, ask the board consider a motion to approve the transportation contract between Abington Heights School District and Maria Bello, a private contractor, to begin on January 6, 2025, to transport children in the AM to St. Mary of Mount Carmel School.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call?
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Mrs. Karam.
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Acker, ask the board consider a motion to approve the preliminary general fund budget for the 25-26 school year.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion?
I just want to make a comment. Thank you, Mr. Mirabelli, for giving that presentation for us tonight and educating us on the timeline and everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. Okay, roll call, please.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Mrs. Karam.
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Mr. Acker, ask that the board consider a motion to approve the Deluxe Athletics proposal for the installation of vinyl-coated wall padding for the Clark Summit Elementary School gymnasium.
So moved.
Second.
On the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Abdallah.
Yes.
Mr. Azar.
Yes.
Mrs. Henderson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hildebrand.
Yes.
Mrs. Karam.
Yes.
Mr. Moran.
Yes.
Mr. Robeson.
Yes.
Mrs. Tierney.
Yes.
Mr. Acker.
Yes.
9-0.
Okay, the next portion would be informational. There's no new information on the horizon so far. How about unfinished business? Any new business? Can I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you all very much. We are adjourned.